The United States has a long history of disasters. Take, for example, Hurricane Helene, which devastated western North Carolina.
Misery and still more loss in the southeast almost a full week after Hurricane Helene swept through the region.
What happened was unbelievable. Cars, trailers, everything just came down the river and through this large building called Riverview Station that we were housed in. It was devastating because everything of ours got flooded.
We lost loved ones. We know people that were swept away in the water.
The Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, is responsible for helping Americans in the aftermath of such disasters.
FEMA has a lot of roles, and if you look at their mission statement, they help people before, during, and after disasters.
Congress today is appropriating more money annually than ever to help communities recover from major disasters. But the rising costs of disasters have forced Congress to appropriate more funds than they planned in recent years. FEMA budgeted over $60 billion for disaster recovery in fiscal year 2025. Some of that money will go toward legacy storms, some dating back decades. FEMA's managing a backlog of over 600 open major disaster declarations.
Starting in 2017 with Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria is when things started to explode.
The Trump administration thinks this agency needs major change.
I think we're going to recommend that FEMA go away.
The problem is there is no urgency in FEMA. The bureaucracy is very, very strong, and it fights you.
So what happens if FEMA goes away? CNBC traveled to North Carolina to find out. Hurricane Helene was one of the deadliest storms for the United States this century. It was also one of the most expensive. The storm is estimated to have caused over $78 billion in damages. Few areas were harder hit than North Carolina. Over 73,000 homes were damaged, and scores of businesses remained shuttered.
I don't think people have recovered. We aren't even reopened yet, but we hope to be in October.
Sarah Wells-Rolland runs the Village Potters Clay Center in western North Carolina. The business opened in 2011.
The amount of people that came through the facility in the community classroom, that averaged about 100 people a week. So a lot of people, a lot of equipment, a lot of workspaces. There was a lot of staff, and they are out of work still.
Hurricane Helene crossed into western North Carolina on September 27, 2024. In the storm, the French Broad River rose over 20 feet. The ensuing flood destroyed much of Asheville's River Arts District, wiping out scores of small businesses, including the Village Potters Clay Center.
And we've been spending this whole year recovering.
Wells-Rolland's business had a flood insurance policy through FEMA's National Flood Insurance Program.
We were never insured for the amount that we needed, and it was because it's expensive. We never could afford a $500,000 policy.
The business was bringing in around $743,000 in revenue ahead of the storm. They documented almost $200,000 in lost equipment. They received a payment of $165,000 for their claim.
But it was pivotal because it's more than a third of what we've raised.
Over 3 million properties nationwide are at risk of flooding. Most of them don't have flood insurance.
The financial assistance that FEMA gives to individuals is not designed to replace insurance. FEMA's programs are designed to jumpstart that recovery process. And so if you're underinsured, you can get a little bit of extra help. If you need a place to stay, you can get some extra help.
For the uninsured, the government pays a maximum of $42,500 for housing-related costs, and the same amount for other needs.
Right now, the burden is on the survivor to extract the dollars and the help from the federal government. It is a very cumbersome process that somebody's dealing with during one of the worst stages of your life.
Small businesses tend to struggle with recoveries from disasters like this.
There's over 1,000 small businesses in the River Arts District. We generate $1.3 billion in revenue. And that's not something to take lightly. We're an economic driver for tourism, hospitality, restaurants, regional development. If we can't take on another loan, how do we get the funding to to help sustain us so that we can stay open, because we have to keep this open while we build back what we lost.
The Carter administration created FEMA in 1979. Their job today is coordination.
FEMA leads, but you have the Department of Defense, Corps of Engineers, Environmental Protection Agency, HUD. There's so many different agencies involved. That whole system and all those programs were never really designed to work in concert together to make recovery efficient. And that's why you still have disaster like Hurricane Katrina that is still actually open. We've recommended for years that they work on streamlining their recovery programs. And honestly, they just have not been able to do it.
They're still spending money on Katrina. It just doesn't make sense. Time is money in any business. And with FEMA, they just keep delaying it and delaying it and delaying it.
The president ultimately determines whether to declare or deny disasters. Many disaster requests were denied in 2025. They would have covered tornadoes in Arkansas, a windstorm in Washington state, and flooding in West Virginia, among many others. FEMA is understaffed. This and claims of political bias against supporters of the president led to the end of programs like door knocking, according to a memo obtained by Wired magazine.
You often would see people knocking on the door in a FEMA shirt saying, hey, have you registered yet? And as the staffing levels diminish and some of those programs go away, you are going to see an impact potentially in less government to the people and requiring more people to come to the government in order to get that same type of assistance.
Federal disaster recovery is considered a high-risk program. In other words, it could fail, impacting the nation's public safety, economics, security, or defense capabilities.
Most state and local governments don't have rainy day funds for this purpose. They don't have the dollars to rebuild for these colossal disasters.
President Trump established the FEMA Review Council in 2025. Some in the group are calling for a complete overhaul of FEMA.
This entire agency needs to be eliminated as it exists today and remade into a responsive agency.
I'm very concerned about FEMA going away. When you've experienced a disaster, to have a federal organization that's designed to help you is comforting. Even if they can't help you quickly, and even if they can't help you completely.
The Department of Homeland Security may be shifting priorities within FEMA. They fired staffers who allegedly used funds to house migrants and gave states over $600 million to build new detention centers. When it comes to storm recovery, the group says it wants FEMA to move at a faster pace. They say that the best way to do that is to put more responsibility for storm recovery onto the states and local governments.
States already have the responsibility for disaster recovery. The frustration that they always express to me is the bureaucratic process and getting reimbursed for their recovery efforts.
The administration wants to closely vet spending, which may slow down FEMA's operations. Secretary Noem must personally sign off on any spending over $100,000 across all of Homeland Security. That includes FEMA. In a statement to CNBC, a FEMA spokesperson said that disasters are best managed when they're federally supported, state managed, and locally executed.
Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, they go bankrupt without FEMA. They get a hurricane this summer, they don't get FEMA money, they're bankrupt. South Carolina, North Carolina, bankrupt.
Recovery costs often require additional funding from Congress.
So think about things like the electric grid, wastewater systems, water treatment systems, public buildings. Those are really the big ticket items that really drive up the costs of recovery for a disaster.
Pushing more costs onto states could have negative consequences. In North Carolina, Hurricane Helene caused $59.6 billion in damage. As of May 2025, the federal government paid out approximately 6% of those costs.
We're going to continue to provide federal assistance in dollars for these types of disasters. The state and local governments just don't have the funding to do it. But if we're going to do that, we need to focus these efforts on rebuilding in a resilient way so the federal government's not just going to pay for it again in 5 years. Disasters are affecting more populated areas and are doing more damage as our infrastructure and our society is more expensive to repair and to fix.
As a result, local governments are trying to build more resilient infrastructure.
We're not the first river district or the first community to be close to the water, to be impacted due to an environmental disaster or a natural disaster. What I think we can do is build back with a better intention.
The city of Asheville, with FEMA, successfully restored water services to residents within weeks after the storm. This process typically takes months.
If it weren't for the fact that they had completed that mitigation project, the water situation, as bad as it was in Asheville, would have been tenfold worse. I don't think Asheville would have water today if they hadn't done that mitigation project.
The Village Potters Clay Center expects to reopen in the fall of 2025, near their old location, but on higher ground.
The business now is way out of risk of flooding. It is very high, so even though it's 0.8 of a mile from the river, it's up, and it's back.
Recognizing the rising risks, FEMA created a program to help the U.S. build back better. It covered most of the costs to build green infrastructure and fortify roads and bridges. FEMA paid out $4.5 billion in grants, but cut funding for this program in 2025. 20 states sued the Trump administration for canceling those grants.
There have been several strong efforts, bipartisan efforts in Congress to try to maintain that program. So they're kind of walking that back a little bit. You know, if money spent today is money saved later. It is well proven that disaster mitigation or resilience building has a payoff of anywhere from 6-to-1 to 11-to-1.
My fear is that these communities may not be able to continue with those projects, and they may end up in worse shape than they were before. I would absolutely be concerned if we turn the response to people at their time of greatest need into a political discussion.
It feels like a slap in the face. When we've put in and done so much on our own, when you're a $1.3 billion industry, that's a strategic investment. That's something that will come back on its own.
To not have FEMA means that now local governments will have to deal with disaster, and it's always bigger than the revenues of the local government. For the funding to be taken away, I think is a colossal disaster. But when people are in crisis, whether it's flooding, whether it's food scarcity, those are the things that I think are so important, that we have a government that has a compassion and empathy for its citizens in those situations.